Hello, my name's Dave Reay. I'm a Professor of Carbon Management and Education at the University of Edinburgh. And today, very briefly, I'm going to cover the topic of limiting climate change. So really giving an overview of where global greenhouse gas emissions come from, and then how they are being addressed or could be addressed in terms of limiting those emissions, and so limiting climate change. Hopefully giving a few good examples of individuals who are taking action from an international perspective, and then obviously we'll get on to some really great Scottish examples as we work through the coming weeks and months. But I'll get on with sharing my screen. So let's see if I can make this work, which is always the challenge. There we go, that seems to have worked. Great, so this first slide looks a bit complicated, but really it's just to show where all those greenhouse gas emissions globally come from. And you can see that the red dominates, so the red is energy. And that's energy use in industry, so making all the things that we consume, in transport, obviously, in terms of burning fossil fuels to move us around, energy use in buildings. Energy is kind of a major player in terms of our emissions globally. You can also see the green triangle there, which is largely around agriculture, so producing the food that we eat, so the use of nitrogen fertilizers, for instance. We'll talk a bit about that. That produces greenhouse gases, as well as belching cows and sheep are a major source of methane, a powerful greenhouse gas. And then we've got the blue triangle, which is waste, things like landfill emissions from our household waste and other waste streams. And industry, the grey triangle, completes the circle. Things like producing cement for building around the world is a major source of carbon dioxide emissions. So we'll touch on all of these and look at, I guess, how they can be limited. The main thing to take home from this complicated slide is that the emissions come from a hugely complex range of sources. So that makes climate change a particular challenge in terms of addressing it, because the sources are so diverse. They touch on every facet of our lives, our lifestyles and our lives. And so we need to cut those emissions radically in all of these areas. So that complexity means we've got the big challenge we're all talking about today and over the coming months. Okay, so I'll focus first on a major part of that large red bit of the diagram, which is where our energy comes from. And I guess the key thing there has been, in terms of limiting emissions, is the transition away from fossil fuels, so particularly coal, which is a high carbon source of energy. In many nations, that's been a transition still to another fossil fuel, natural gas, but that emits less carbon dioxide, but it's still something which needs to be avoided in terms of cutting emissions of greenhouse gases. So a key hope, I guess, for fossil fuel burning industries is that if they're going to carry on burning fossil fuel, actually they capture any of the carbon dioxide which is emitted during that process. So industry has a key role there in this technology called carbon capture and storage, so capturing the carbon and putting it underground. So that's part of limiting the emissions, but it won't get us to zero emissions by itself. And a major revolution, I guess, that we're seeing in energy around the world is renewables. So that bottom picture showing solar panels, obviously they're hugely effective in sunny areas. The prices come right down. They're a great way to produce zero carbon electricity. In other areas of the world, wind is a great source of renewable energy. And obviously in Scotland, that's a major one for us in terms of a source of low carbon electricity to substitute for the fossil fuels. In other areas, obviously, there's things like marine energy and tidal energy, hydroelectrics been around a long time and provides electricity without fossil fuels in many countries. And I've got a few examples in here, so kind of heroes around the particular areas. And my first one is Catherine Poets, who you can see on the right there with her colleague on a motorbike. And she represents a thing called waste to energy. So this is a form of energy where you're using a waste source, in her case, farmers in Ethiopia who've got manure from their cattle. That manure can be rotted down to produce methane. So an energy source which is from waste, which is biological in origin, so different from the kind of gas we get in our houses at the moment in terms of boilers and cooking. and is low carbon. So the great thing Catherine's done is link up all those farmers with manure in terms of capturing the methane, but also she invented these bags which make them the energy mobile. So you can put the methane into the bags, take it along to a school kitchen to provide the energy for cooking there in a sustainable way, in a low carbon way. So yeah, she's the first hero here in terms of making something which is regarded as a waste product into something really valuable and sustainable in the form of energy. The next area I wanted to talk about briefly was how we travel. And obviously, again, the idea here is that largely we substitute away from fossil fuels. So using active travel, like that picture on the top left of cycling and walking, something we'd be doing more of, I guess, under lockdown particularly. But that's a way, obviously, where that's facilitated for people to do, that can avoid a lot of the fossil fuel burning and the carbon emissions. Obviously, for existing forms of transport like buses and cars and trucks, actually looking at different fuels. Again, moving away from fossil fuels, like the bus there would normally run on diesel, but that bus is actually running on hydrogen, so through a fuel cell, so it can be much lower carbon in terms of what's powering it. And the picture at the bottom, an electric car, again, if we can make the electricity really clean using renewables and have lots of that, then there's the potential to substitute fossil fuel powered cars with electric cars and cut emissions that way. And my hero for this one is a slightly odd one. It's Tim Berners-Lee, the inventor of the internet. And I guess he's in here really as an exemplar of how virtual transport has transformed all our lives, I guess, under lockdown, allowing us all to meet here in terms of the assembly without having to move, although it's a shame we aren't all together for a cup of tea and a proper chat together. But it does allow the potential to reduce transport emissions through allowing virtual meetings to happen, particularly long distance in terms of reducing emissions from flying. Right, this one's a big one, but I'm going to be try and be brief. So how we live, shop and eat. So in terms of how we live, obviously our buildings, our houses, as well as our offices, how energy efficient they are is a key thing to then how much carbon is emitted through the energy use. So making sure new buildings are really highly energy efficient, but also how we retrofit, so improve the energy efficiency of our existing buildings to make sure they use a minimum amount of energy and so cut the emissions. That's a key part of limiting climate change. In hot countries, obviously keeping cool is again a key role of good design and good built environment. I've got in here in terms of how we shop an iPhone, but this could be any product because every product we buy has a carbon footprint. And the iPhone exemplifies something where lots of elements have gone into it. There's been lots of energy and lots of emissions associated with its production. And a key thing here is consumption is a real driver of emissions globally. So limiting consumption, but how we consume. So that mantra of reduce, reuse, recycle absolutely applies here in terms of the principles of what's called the circular economy, where for that iPhone, can we make sure it lasts a long time? So we're not buying a new iPhone every couple of years, but actually one iPhone and all the carbon that's associated with it is stretched out over a longer period. But when it comes to the ends of its life, can it be reused in terms of all those valuable components which are in it? So reusing those resources, reducing the impact on the environment, including its emissions. The final one at the bottom is one really dear to my heart, so I could talk about it for ages, which is food. So what we eat. Some of our foods have a high carbon footprint, so things like red meat and dairy, simply because the animals that produce them emit a lot of methane, so they belch methane, which is a powerful greenhouse gas. So as our diets change, as people get more affluent, generally they eat more meat and dairy around the world. So that could increase emissions, but actually looking at those diets becoming lower carbon, so looking at plant-based alternatives, avoiding overconsumption. And the biggest one for me is reducing food waste. So about a third of our food globally that's produced, we never get to eat. It's wasted at some point in the supply chain. Either it kind of is lost in the fields or in transport, in the supermarkets or in the back of our fridges. And so reducing food waste is a really powerful way to cut emissions because it means you don't have to grow the food twice. My hero for this one is Emily Cummings. So Emily here pictured in a workshop, and apparently from the age of 4, she drove her grandfather round the twist in terms of working in his workshop and stealing all of his tools. But as an adult, she works mainly in Namibia. And what she identified in the community she was working with is that there's enough food, but it goes off really quickly because there's no mains electricity, no refrigerators. And so what Emily came up with her skills, as she's showing here, is a solar fridge. It needs no electricity. It works basically by liquid going into the outer casing and the sun shining on that and the water evaporating and cooling whatever's inside. So she was able to essentially give an option which was really low carbon, didn't need electricity supply, but also gave greater food security and avoided food waste. Right, my final one I want to talk about is a biggie too, which is how we use our land and seas. And you can see on the top left an example of how land is cleared, in this case for agriculture, and that causes a lot of carbon emissions. So deforestation, so cutting down trees, causes a lot of carbon to enter into the atmosphere. And so avoiding deforestation, reducing the degradation of the soils because they hold loads of carbon is really important too. Obviously planting trees in these areas can actually start capturing the carbon back from the atmosphere. So that's a key part of limiting climate change. The one in the middle is really important and really important in Scotland. So this is the flow country up north, and it represents peatland restoration. So peatlands we know are amazing in terms of their habitats and all the species they support. They also support huge amounts of carbon in the soils. But we've drained a lot of the peatlands in Scotland for agriculture in previous decades, and that's released a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. So a lot of attention now is how to restore those peatlands to allow them to emit less carbon. But actually, if we restore them to their proper state, they actually will take carbon out of the atmosphere and help us proactively limit climate change. So we'll hear a lot about peatland restoration, I think, because it's so important, and the stories around it in Scotland as we go through the assembly process. The final one on the bottom left, again dear to my heart, is a thing called blue carbon. So this is seaweed and coastal areas and the oceans. Again, hugely important in the global carbon cycle, and potential there again to protect that carbon, but also to enhance it to limit climate change. My final hero, last but not least, is Lillian. So Lillian Wangombe, she's a maize farmer in Kenya, and she practices this strategy called push-pull agriculture. So when she plants her maize crop, she also plants another crop around the outside of her maize, which attracts the pests from the maize. So basically, that's the pull part of it. So it's pulling this thing called the stem borer away from the maize, and this other plant kills the stem borer. But she also, around the maize, she plants a small plant called Desmodium, which pushes the pest away. So it emits a smell which the pests don't like. So they are pulled and pushed away from Lillian's crop. The brilliant thing, the other brilliant thing Desmodium does, this wee plant, is fix nitrogen from the air. So a bit like beans and peas, it enriches the soil. So it means Lillian doesn't need to use nitrogen fertilizers, which are a key source of greenhouse gas emissions. So she's got a low emission system. So she's limiting the emissions, but it's also really resilient. It's, she gets higher yields and it's protected from pest attack. And I guess one of the threads both Kate and I have picked up, and will pick up much more, is that when we're talking about climate change risk and impacts, then we need to adapt to those and be ready for them. But a lot of those actions also cross over into cutting emissions as well. So they're kind of win-win strategies, the sweet spot of addressing climate change. So I'll finish there, but thank you very much.